I love this, man. I love this. I've got to start by saying I found the date, Ed. It was emotional. It was imprinted, but I've been on the internet and found it. I first met Ed on the 25th of October 2016. So that was a little while ago, wasn't it? And we'll get into it, but at that time, it was very early days in your business, wasn't it?
I was saying he looks younger now. It's like a curious case of Benjamin Button.
I love this. It's the tash, mate. It's fashion. It's fashion. But I think in terms of that, like, this is, again, I've had this one circled, and I really appreciate you giving up the time. I know how like busy you are, but I've had this one circled because it feels like we are like completing a circle a little bit, and I feel like we're going to jump forward 10 years over the course of the next hour. As with previous events, like it's a conversation. I'm going to spend the next hour or so just chatting through with Ed. It's super informal. It's super chilled. I'm hoping at the end, if there's the desire and there's a few hands up, I'm hoping we could tempt Ed to answer a few of your questions as well. But we'll set the scene. In terms of that, the plan is we're going to start off with an origin story. I say it every week, we love an origin story. So we're going to see where it started. We're going to talk about the very early days of the company. We're going to talk about the pivot to where Ed is now. We are going to spend quite a bit of time talking about fundraising. And I feel like we're very lucky to have Ed with us in that respect, actually. Lots of experience in that area. And then we're going to talk a bit about his approach to leadership and culture. And then finally, we're going to finish with a little bit of focus on the future and advice for the future founders. Ed called out, we grabbed 10 minutes before, and I was like, mate, check out these questions. He's like, mate, we are not getting through these in an hour. So we'll see where it takes us, basically. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Ed into the conversation. If you could, Ed, quick introduction, if you don't mind, what your role is at the moment, and then we'll drill into your origin from there.
Yeah, so firstly, I'm really grateful to be here, and David and the team are brilliant and always have been. And one of the reasons that I love coming to these events is because, and kind of talking like this, is because David created these kinds of opportunities for me back when I was starting Flock, and I could come and see, what the next few years might look like and learn from people who had gone through the kind of trials and tribulations. And I'll always be really grateful for that. So real pleasure to be here.
Thank you, man.
So my name's Ed Leon Klinger. My role is the same as it was 9 years ago. I'm the CEO of Flock. And we started Flock, me and my co-founder, back in 2015-16. He was actually kind enough to bring me on board. He started the business essentially at university. I was at university as well. He convinced me to give up what was actually a very reputable job in the city and come and join him to start this business that had no business plan, no customers, no revenue, and no plan. So it was like one of those kind of do or die sliding door moments. Decided to go for it and have not regretted the decision at all. And look back on that as one of the most important decisions in my life, was the decision to actually join my co-founder Antton and start this business, as opposed to kind of going headfirst into private equity, which is where I was going to end up. So and I've came in as CEO and I've been CEO throughout.
We are going to drill into this as well, because we were talking a little bit beforehand, but you're the CEO of 2/3 people is different to being the CEO of 75 people with investment and large revenue and all that type of stuff. So we'll talk about the journey. Interestingly, that's 3 out of 3 now for the founders that we've interviewed that had a reputable job in the city and chose to get rid of that and come and start something. So again, I'll take that as a good sign for everybody in the room to go out there and start building some stuff. So in terms of your origin story, you touched on it a little tiny bit there. You're at university, your co-founder was at university, you're at different universities. What were you studying? What was Antton studying, and how did it come together? How did it start?
Yeah, so I was doing my second masters at Cambridge, and I was focusing on kind of autonomous things, autonomous drones, autonomous cars, and kind of artificially intelligent systems that could control themselves and react to their environments. And I was writing papers about what I thought the future looked like. You know, what do driverless cars look like in 10 years' time? Are they driving around the streets of London? If so, how are they avoiding hitting people or objects, and how are they insured? And how do we manage risk? And how do we write sensible kind of economic and legal policies for these new technologies? And I was quite loud about what I was doing, in that I was kind of putting it online and talking to people about it and just trying to kind of make some interesting noise and conversation about the topic, just because I really enjoyed it, really enjoyed talking to people about it, and getting kind of expert opinion on it. My now co-founder, Antton, had done an engineering course at Imperial, and he had actually built, during that course, a risk analysis tool for drone flights, where you could kind of punch in the coordinates of where you want to fly your drone, and it would do a kind of quantified risk analysis for that flight. And that was one of the things that I had written about in one of my papers was, oh, if only someone would come along and build a kind of quantified risk system for these autonomous vehicles, wouldn't that be great? And because I had kind of put that online, and this is what I'm talking about now, this kind of idea of putting stuff out there is a bit of a theme that I quite enjoy, and that has been quite helpful for me throughout the last kind of decade, is just being really open, almost kind of comically open and loud about what we're working on, to the point that people will say, you know, is that maybe even oversharing? You know, do you want your competitors to hear all this? My kind of life philosophy and work philosophy is just to be very, very open about what it is we're building, very transparent about it, and I think that good things happen as a result of that. You kind of create the surface area for lucky things to happen, and this was one of those things. A mutual friend of mine and Antton kind of joined the dots and said, oh, actually, you know, you built this system at university and you wrote about this in this paper, you guys should meet. So we went and we met on Old Street Roundabout at Grind, and talked for hours about the future of autonomous drones, and then decided almost there and then it might make sense for us to work together.
Amazing. Absolutely love that, man. And in terms of that, it sounds very much like instant alignment. Like, did you like sort of fact check? We spend a lot of time talking to people, I think, in the events we've run so far. How do you find your co-founder? Like, do you know if they're the right one and stuff like that? With what you did, was it just that instant spark? Was it a bit like, screw it, let's do it and we'll deal with it afterwards? What was that alignment like when you first met?
Well, that's a good question. I haven't thought about that for about a decade. I think it was probably a couple of things. So Antton and I, both on that day and every day since for the last decade, don't agree on everything. But I think one thing that we both do is we're both willing to disagree and have just thoughtful, calm, rational conversations and work towards an answer that we can align on. And if we don't end up agreeing on something, we're quite good at kind of disagreeing but committing to one answer, rather than sowing kind of discontent and disharmony in the company by having a constant disagreement. And that was very apparent from the second we met. We could just have conversations about 20 topics, maybe agree on 10, disagree on 10, but maintain a very kind of calm and civil discourse. And we're both quite intellectually curious. So if we don't understand something, or if we don't agree, our inclination is to try and figure out why we don't agree and ask good questions. And I saw that quality in him, and I still see that quality in him. We're also a bit of a kind of yin and yang in our personalities. I'm quite kind of big picture. I have big ideas which aren't necessarily realistic. And Anton's very good at kind of taking something that seems big and kind of interesting and exciting in the future and mapping it out in a very methodical way and realizing all the reasons why it won't work, so that together we can actually build something that does work. So I think when we realized we had those kind of conflicting personalities, it worked well.
That resonates for me, and I'm looking straight at you, Jess. Like, this is how it goes with us as well. I've gone off script already, Ed. But the thing I loved there was the sharing piece. Again, I speak to a lot of potential founders, and I think a lot of people are like, oh, I'm so scared of sharing my idea. What if someone steals my idea? If I want to talk to anyone about it, they need to sign an NDA, and like, I don't want to, you know, how do we do it? But you're actually saying, like, just get it out there, and that creates the surface area of luck, as you were saying, to make the connections happen.
Totally.
So,
I'm really obsessed with this idea of luck surface area. I talk about it to my team all the time. Like, if you put yourself out there, you talk about what you're working on, and you get people excited, you'll just be surprised by how many opportunities just kind of magic themselves out of thin air. I also just generally believe that if you've got an interesting idea, and if you're worried that by talking about your idea you'll kind of lose out to a competitor, probably you want to be in a position where you can talk openly about your idea, but because you've got the the conviction and the excitement, the enthusiasm, and the passion for it.
Yep.
You're kind of building a small team and then a troop and a larger team, and kind of getting them excited and passionate and working with you to build it.
Yeah.
If you're so worried that that idea will be taken and done better elsewhere, it's almost like you might as well not even give it a go because you're doomed right from the outset. There are probably a very small percentage of ideas where that problem does exist, but I think the body of the weight of evidence that I've seen in my career is that those founders who are loud and open about their ideas tend to have more positives than negatives as a result.
Amazing. I love that. And if I'm honest, I've struggled with that at different points. You're a bit scared you're going to lose a client. It's slightly different for me. I'm not in a product space, but worried you're going to lose a client, or worried someone else is going to come. Actually, if you're passionate and you're building and you're out there, then the good stuff happens. Back on script. Everyone will be pleased to know we're back on script now. You've obviously picked the insurance space. You've talked about that autonomous. You've talked about the data piece and stuff like that. What was it that made you think like this is ripe for innovation, that there's a space for us and ideas in this very traditional industry?
So the truth is we actually didn't. We kind of stumbled across it. I think when looking back, it's easy to, if I wanted to, I could tell the story of Flock as a kind of series of really intentionally well-planned decisions. But in reality, as many people here will know, especially if you're kind of building your own business, reality is just much messier. And you kind of bump into ideas, and then you'll randomly speak to a customer who will tell you something, and you'll learn, and you'll pivot, and you'll change. And that was the reality for Flock. So with us, we actually started as a drone risk analysis app that drone pilots could use to plan and minimize the risk of their drone flights. And drone pilots were telling us, oh, this is really cool. My drone flights are far safer now. And we had users like the BBC and Netflix, so companies who are doing quite cool things with these drones. And they're telling us what's really useful is if we could take this to our insurance company, which is a massively expensive cost for us, is our insurance. What if we could tell them that we're using this amazing app that makes insurance cheaper, makes drone flights safer? Hopefully that will make our insurance cheaper. And so we went and spoke to the insurance companies, and what we realized really, really quickly was they had no interest in this whatsoever. They had a really basic product. It was all done on a kind of spreadsheet, super, super simple. They didn't like the use of advanced technology. They certainly couldn't kind of make sense of all of our data. And so when we said, can you make your insurance cheaper for these pilots? They were just like, no, because we do things the same way we've done things for 50 years and we don't plan on changing it. So we kind of, Antton and I very, very naively basically said, all right, we'll start our own insurance company and we'll just do it ourselves. Yeah. And it was probably that naivety, we didn't know anything about insurance. Our exposure to insurance in our early 20s was that maybe once we'd bought an insurance policy when we passed our driving test. And I think that naivety actually played in our favor. Because if I knew everything I knew about insurance that I know now, back then, I probably wouldn't have made that decision because it would have been too difficult. I could have foreseen all the different hurdles. But the fact that we were coming at this from the kind of naive, technical young founders meant that we were quite willing to say, we'll just start our own insurance company and we'll do it ourselves.
Yeah, makes lots of sense. Again, slightly off-piste. With what you're explaining about that naivety, sometimes what you don't know, and you just get in and you start swimming. Do you think that then makes it more difficult for older founders, or do you think you can coach that into yourself to still like take the leap? I guess as you get older, it gets harder to take the leap because of risk and life, and
So anecdotally, some of the best founders I know are older founders. I know people in their 40s, 50s who have started really crazy, innovative companies from scratch and done amazing, amazing things. And I read a paper recently put out by a VC that looked at some of the indicators of startup success, and actually older founders tend to outperform younger founders, which is not a kind of popular statistic to cite because it goes against kind of conventional wisdom, but it is actually the truth.
Okay, very interesting. In terms of those feedback signals then, we're in the early days, you've built a product, people are using your product, you've took that feedback and you've gone and had conversations with the insurance companies, they've talked to them. So it sounds like there was a lot of you listening to people, potential customers or customers. Were there particular feedback signals as you were growing? Like how did you manage that process? Were you just sort of small and super close to your customers? How did you manage the feedback on the product?
When it's kind of evolved throughout the course of the business. When we were a really small team, when you're a team of 3-4 people, there's no such thing as a job description. So whether you're the CEO or the CPO, it doesn't really make sense to necessarily even have a C in the title. You know, what are you the C of? And actually, what we found was that everyone was doing everything. We were speaking to customers constantly. We had potential customers on WhatsApp that we would try and convince to become customers. They would then add their friends to WhatsApp groups, and we'd have big discussions and debates. We'd send them screenshots of what we were thinking of building, and they'd give us reactions and so on and so forth. So it was very, very scrappy, and we were getting feedback all the time. The best kind of feedback was aggressive, angry, frustrated feedback from customers telling us that we'd wasted their time and that they would never buy from us, because then you've got the opportunity to speak to someone who's really passionate about what they do and who's telling you with kind of all of their, with the full force of all of their emotion, what you should do differently. So that's really, really powerful. As the business has evolved, obviously our approach has evolved. You know, we now have customer advisory boards and partner advisory boards, and we have really structured sessions where we'll, you know, several months in advance, we'll let a very large customer know that we're going to meet them. They'll bring various members of their team along. We'll bring members of our team along, and it's very structured. But I think the philosophy is the same, which, like, no matter how large you become as a business, no matter how structured the process, fundamentally you're trying to come up with a really sensible priority order of what your customers care about the most. The tricky thing, I think, is not necessarily building precisely what your customers demand, precisely when your customers demand it. Sometimes the most difficult decision that we have to make, or I have to make, is actually to say no to a customer, or to say, we understand that your priority order is this, but our vision as a business actually takes us in this direction, so we're going to turn down your lovely revenue and we're not going to build what you want. That's when things get really tricky.
Yeah, again, makes so much sense. In terms of that, I guess when you're first building, I think there is a temptation as you're building a product, you lock yourself away, and you're in a room for 6 months and you come out the room with your new app or your new whatever it is that you've built. How important is that? Like, is it a constant process for you? Are you like we put this new this new feature out there? Is it like weekly? Is it daily? Like monthly? How quick was the feedback loop?
This is one of the things that's probably changed the most throughout the history of the business. When we started the business, when we were a small team, and AI was one of those things that we talked about at university and in think tanks.
10 years ago.
10 years ago.
Wow. I thought it was new.
It took months for us to get products built, and I think even though we were speaking to customers on a regular basis, we still back then, early days of the company, made the mistake of having a product vision and pouring our time and effort into it without just testing it as quickly as we would like. So I think we were still pretty agile in speaking to customers, but we still made all the classic mistakes of being really confident that we'd built the product that customers want. And we all got excited about a launch, and then we'd launch it and we'd kind of watch the Google Analytics, and it'd be like, one customer has bought this product. We're like, oh, we're supposed to be thousands, right? So we still made that mistake, as many, many startups have done. I think what's interesting is if I compare that to where we are now, you know, we're in a really, really interesting transition, I think, and I say we, everyone in this room and the kind of economy at large, where AI is starting to hit a kind of exponential and very, very steep curve. I'm somewhat of a kind of AI maximalist. I fully buy into all of the AI hype. So whilst you might read things on LinkedIn saying, people say that AI is a big deal, don't believe the hype. I do believe the hype. I really think it's one of the most important inventions in human history, and I don't think the world's ever going to look the same. And we're experiencing it in real time at Flock. Individuals in the business who are non-technical, who are not engineers, who don't even work in product, can speak an idea and it will appear on their screen in 30 seconds, and then they can put it on their mobile and take it to a customer, and a customer can give them real-time feedback, and they can speak the feedback into their screen, and the product will evolve and change, and the customer will say, oh, that's better, that's exactly what I wanted, in the space of a single conversation. This is unheard of just 3 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. So the rate at which we can iterate and perfect products now is 100x, 1000x faster, and this trend is only going to continue. So almost everything I learned about kind of product development, technological development, even management and leadership has had to really rapidly evolve because of the advent of AI over the last couple of years.
And I guess I'm not going to go down this whole AI path.
Well, we could talk about it forever.
Honestly, I love it myself. But I guess in terms of that, your feeling with it is a bit like speaking your ideas creates the surface area for luck. It's almost a bit like you're leaning into AI as well, and you think perhaps a little bit the people at the forefront that are really jumping on this now are just going to benefit. There's no downsides basically. You're going to put yourself ahead, create the surface area. One
of the questions I get asked the most, especially by young people, is what's the best thing I can do to prepare for the world of work, and to further myself in my organisation or to maximise my likelihood of getting a great job. My answer is the same, and it has been over the last 6 months. It's just start using the latest and greatest AI tools, wake up and build something with Lovable and be coding on Cursor at lunchtime and speak to some potential customers about it or individuals in your business and show them what you've built. Because if you can kind of master these tools, you'll be the chosen one in your business or at that next interview that you go to, because I think every organisation, and it's interesting, we're filming this and this will go online. By the time this is online, it'll be out of date because this is changing so fast. But right now, as of today's date, organisations are desperate to have people inside them who know how to use these tools and use them for pragmatic purposes and solve real problems. So that's my advice to almost anyone who's thinking about getting a job or getting a promotion.
Man, I'm, again, definitely showing my age at this point, but I was around for the .com and it felt like it was quick at the time, but AI is just like week to week, it's different, which is fantastic. But definitely back to Flock. I think I listen to all the podcasts, I listen to all the advice, and I think a lot of founders are advised to go after a big market. If you can go after a market that's worth billions and billions and you get a small percentage of it, you're going to have a very big company. Obviously with Flock, you've gone after a very narrow market. What did that look like? Why did you do that? And how did that, set you up in the early days, I guess?
So the decision to go after the drone market back in kind of 2015-16 was like, it's kind of similar to what I was saying earlier. It wasn't some well thought out strategic decision at the time. It was just Antton and I were both really, really excited by it, really interested in it. We figured out a niche in that market that we could solve at that point, which was the insurance problem, kind of using real-time data and risk management to help these drone pilots fly safer and save money on their insurance was something that customers were really resonating with. So we went for it. So it wasn't that we had this kind of 20-year genius top-down plan, which began with drones. It was that it was very bottom-up and organic. We were speaking to customers who were telling us this solves our problem. So we said, let's go ahead and solve the problem. Rather than being too academic about the size of the market, let's just solve a problem for a customer. And then one customer became 10, and eventually we had thousands of drone customers in the UK. The problem did arise, which is that we got to about 50% of the UK market. It was almost impossible for us to grow anymore, and we had a tiny business. And that's when we decided, right, we need to find a much, much bigger market.
Amazing. That's where we're going now. This is seamless. I love it. But I think during that early you touched on it there, actually. There was an aha moment. You went, we have solved a problem. So you've done that in that small market. You did get a moment where you went, we're on to something.
I think there was a series of moments.
Right.
There was the first moment, which was hundreds of drone pilots were starting to download our app to become safer, and minimize the risk of their flights. The next aha moment was them telling us this will be really useful for insurance. And the next aha moment was realizing that it's not useful for insurance at all because the insurance companies don't understand how to use this data. And the next aha moment was realizing we'll build our own insurance company and we'll do it.
Risk.
So it was, there's a series of these, and they sound really simple in hindsight. At the time, it was an arduous process where there might have been weeks or months between each of those realizations.
Amazing. And that takes us, I guess, towards where we are today. So you've had success, 50% market share. I think in lots of industries you'd be very, very happy with that. But we've still got a relatively small business. So there has been a pivot. So before we talk about the pivot, what does Flock look like today?
So today we're about 70 staff across most of the UK. So we've got an office in London and some people up north and scattered around, a few international. And we are not in the drone insurance industry at all. We've completely pivoted away from that, and we're now a motor fleet insurance provider. Motor fleet, for anyone who's not aware of what motor fleets are, most people aren't, it's basically a business that owns, for us, it's about 10 plus vehicles, mostly used for commercial purposes. So we insure a very large percentage of the UK Amazon vans, for example. We insure some large rental fleets. We insure lots of companies that might have 10, 20, 100 vans that they use for transporting their own goods and their own people around the country. And just in terms of why are we a tech company rather than just a traditional insurance business, the entire proposition is powered by data science, and specifically we put devices, telematics devices, in all of these vehicles. So we insure tens of thousands of vehicles, and we have devices in every single one, and we can track those vehicles in real time. We know where they are, we know how and when they're being driven, we know what roads they're on, we know who's driving them and how safe those drivers are. We score those drivers in real time, we score the fleet in real time, and then we sit down and we actually work with the fleet managers, so the people who are in charge of looking after all of these vehicles, and we help them improve the safety of the fleet. So, we might work with them, we sit down with them every single month face to face, and we'll work with them, for example, to identify some of their most high risk drivers, and we'll help them train those drivers or maybe even remove those drivers from their fleet if they're really, really bad. And over time, what we see is that these fleets become safer. So we actually just did a massive analysis of all of our data over the last few years, and we found that our fleets crash 10% less year on year as a result of working with us and sitting down and kind of understanding how to minimize the risk associated with their fleet. We then integrate all of that data. We're approaching 1 billion miles of insured data. We integrate all of that into our underwriting model and our pricing model so that the safer you drive, the less you pay for your insurance. So throughout the course of a year, one of our fleet customers will have a dashboard that they log into, and they can see all of their data, and they can add vehicles and all the things that you'd expect. And in the top of their dashboard, they see a really big pound number. And that's the number of pounds that they'll get paid back by Flock at the end of the year because they've been driving safer. So some customers might pay £1 million for their insurance, and they can earn up to £100,000 back at the end of the year for their safer driving and for their efforts. So that's what we do today. Everything I've just described is surprisingly similar to the approach that we took in the drone industry, whereby we were helping drone pilots become safer, and the safer they were, the less they would pay for their insurance. We took that exact same idea, we launched it into commercial motor, and we didn't look back.
Amazing, amazing. I've got a picture of some poor bloke being pulled in on Monday morning, basically going, the data science says you're a bad driver, and it's just, nightmare, all his colleagues,
That is kind of what happens. We were speaking with a customer the other day who runs a delivery fleet, delivering packages all over the country. And he's got a depot with a big warehouse where all the drivers drive back at the end of the day. Yeah. And he's bought a projector, and he connects it to his laptop, and he projects the Flock dashboard onto the side of his depot, so that when these drivers drive in, they can see where they rank on that day from a safety perspective. It does sound harsh and kind of big brothery, but it's worth noting. So our mission as a business, which we take really, really seriously, we hire for this mission and we reward for this mission. It's written in comically large letters on the inside of our office, is to make the world quantifiably safer. Right, and it's quite specifically written mission, quantifiably safer. We want to be able to measure how much safer we make the world. And so, whilst it's harsh that some drivers might be pulled aside and given a talking to because they were speeding, the flip side of that is that we can actually start to look at our fleets and say we've reduced the amount of speeding that these fleets are doing and that these drivers are doing in urban areas, and that translates directly into fewer crashes. And fewer crashes means fewer injured drivers, fewer injured pedestrians. Over 1 million people die every year due to road traffic accidents. So if we can even have a small dent on that number, that's something that we as a team can be quite proud of. And it's also, that mission allows us to hire, I think we might get onto something like this, but that mission allows us to hire some really incredible people, because when we pull people out of big insurance companies, big, well-paid, kind of very prestigious jobs. They would never ordinarily join a startup with 70 staff if that startup's mission was to build an insurance company that looks like the one that they're in. But our mission is to do something quite spectacular, or I think it's quite spectacular if we can achieve it. And that's quite motivational for people, right? Because they think, actually, I've been doing this for 20 years. I've built a marginally more successful insurance company for my shareholders. I wonder if I can go and actually save a life by doing this at Flock.
Mate, absolutely love that. Fantastic, man. So you've pivoted, and it was a massive success. We're happy with that. But the thing I'm keen to drill into is that point of the pivot. Was there a point where you went, screw this, turn all this off, let's start again? Was it like a big bang? Was it, again, another sort of slow series of steps? So what did that transition look like?
So the transition looked like we were getting to kind of diminishing returns in the UK drone market. We then expanded all across Europe in an attempt to kind of build the size of the market, grow our TAM, so we had more customers, a bigger pool to fish from. But it slowly dawned, and then very rapidly dawned on me and Antton, my co-founder, that this was an uphill battle. It was like pushing water uphill to continue growing in the drone market. And we did two things. We did we made the call that it would make sense for us to expand into a new market. So we didn't think of it at the time as a pivot. We said, we're going to continue growing the drone business, and we'll bring in a new market, and we'll start growing there, and maybe down the line we'll bring in another new market. So we did two things. We did a kind of top-down, very academic analysis of the UK, and this was the kind of thing that you could do behind a desk. It was, what are the different markets we could expand into? We chose about 10. So we had like e-scooters and commercial motor and personal motor and aviation and cargo ships. We had 10 of these markets, and we said, how big are they? Are they growing or shrinking? And how connected are they? And by connected, I mean, are these vehicles transmitting real-time data? And if they are, that means we can use our USP. And if they're not, that means we might not be able to use our USP. So we found some interesting things. So, e-scooters were definitely connected. So they ticked that box, 100% online, but it's a tiny, tiny market. And then we came across commercial motor, and we said, this ticks every single box. It's a big market. It's £5 billion plus in the UK. It's growing, and these vehicles are connected. 33% of commercial motor vehicles at that point had telematics in, but critically, that was growing at 17% per year. So we knew that there were some really interesting tailwinds that if we could get into this market early, we'd have an advantage over competitors. And then the other thing was that was very academic. The other thing was bottom up. We just went and spoke to customers. Spoke to pilots and commercial aviation customers and cargo shipping customers. And we went and spent a bunch of time with lorry drivers and fleet managers. And we had this really strong resonance with the world of commercial fleets. These guys were saying, we've spent all this money connecting all our vehicles. We've got these telematics devices. If only we could give that data to our insurance provider, and our insurance provider could help us become safer and save money. And it sounded exactly like the conversations that we had with those drone pilots who were telling us the same thing. So there was even one conversation with one of our drone customers who said, look, we really like the drone insurance product. We've got these 12 vans. Can we put the vans on the drone app and insure the vans on the drone app? That would be amazing. We could insure our vans with Flock. And I remember saying to him, he was a friend at the time, and I remember saying to him, I was like, look, we'd love to do that, but it's so much work for us to do that. And we're right in the middle of this really busy project trying to figure out what our next market's going to be. And then we kind of looked at each other and we were like, wait, that makes of course we should be doing this. Because customers are pulling us in. And so when you have that kind of really strong product market fit and customers are telling you, I will buy your product today, that was the aha moment that we needed to say, let's do it.
Yeah, amazing. And you ended up with both running at once, and then at some point there was a decision, okay, we're killing the drone stuff. Yeah.
Running both businesses at the same time was absolutely brutal. I think we kidded ourselves that we could run these two businesses in parallel and they'd just be like two products of the same business. Utter BS. I'm kind of censoring myself for your video camera.
You don't have to.
But it did not pan out like that. It was like running two entirely different businesses, entirely orthogonal businesses. We would have a 3-hour leadership meeting. We spend an hour and a half of the leadership meeting talking about a single drone claim because Barry, the drone pilot, had accidentally flown his drone into a seagull. And then we'd spend the next half of the leadership meeting talking about a £1 million motor fleet customer who we want to win. And so it's two different halves of your brain. It's two different problem sets, and it's two different orders of magnitude in terms of the size of the problem.
Yeah.
And that's when we said, oh, this is crazy. Yeah. We just need to choose a winning horse and put all of our time and attention on that winning horse.
And it wasn't Barry and his seagull.
He got his claim paid out.
Okay, good for Barry.
It was a £350 payout. That's what we spent an hour and a half talking about. I still remember it, instead of the £1 million customer. Yeah.
There we go. Mate, little segue. I've got a little note here. 1/3 of Amazon's UK delivery fleet now use Flock. That's true?
About right. Yeah, probably
true?
1/3 of the UK's Amazon delivery service partners. So
wow.
Amazon operate an interesting model. They work with kind of independent contractors who have fleets with anything from kind of 10 to 50 plus vehicles. Yeah. And we're one of the main insurers of those vehicles.
Mate, superb. Love that. Final question on the pivot. I think it's difficult for founders. I think it's quite a common thing. You've gone down a path, you're starting to get the feeling, I need to change path, but making the decision is hard. So I guess, have you got any advice? I know you've explained how you did it. Is it a case that you just have to kind of face up and bite the bullet? How would you approach it? If you know in your gut you're going the wrong way, you start to see some data, you're going the wrong way, is there anything that you would advise founders to actually make you do the change?
As a general rule, I've changed my perspective on this a lot over the last decade. I used to be quite academic and data-driven, and I used to think that big decisions needed to have kind of reams and reams of data supporting it so that you could look back on it and be really confident that you've made the right call because all the data suggests it. And I think that's sometimes true, right? Sometimes it is worth having, a very, very thoughtfully considered decision, especially a decision that you can't take back. But it can also be quite cowardly. And I think I look back on myself as an early stage founder and think of myself as quite cowardly and how long it would take me to make some decisions. Because in reality, I was kind of convincing myself that I needed all this data to make the decision, to make sure I was being academic and rigorous. And actually, I was probably just too cowardly to just take the risk and make the decision. Yeah. So I think now I think I'm kind of a big believer in trust your gut as a founder. Yeah. The reason you're a founder is because you have those good gut instincts. And successful founders, many of the best founders I know, I ask them things that they regret, and often it's that they didn't trust their gut fast enough, and they prevaricated and spent a bunch of time doing paralysis analysis instead of just making a big decision. So if your gut is telling you that you're in the wrong market and that there's a better option, do everything it takes to do that. And actually, sometimes the thing stopping you do that is other people around you, investors or friends or early employees or recent employees who will do their best to stop you making that decision that is right. Yeah. Not because they're bad people, but because they don't have all the context that you have. And I think I've fallen foul of that in the past. Yeah.
Love that. That's going on the social somehow. That's a reel somewhere there.
Don't show my investors.
One in particular.
Yes.
We'll come back to that. So, fundraising. Speaking of investors, are we on time? We're roughly on time.
No way.
We're not on time, but we're fine. So, fundraising. I'm going to big you up here, man. I feel like you've got a wealth of knowledge in this area. I think you've been very successful in this area. So I'd maybe start, actually, if you don't mind, just sort of bullet point the rounds, like what the investment looked like through Flock, and then we'll drill into some questions.
Yeah. You want me to do that, or you're doing that?
I want you to do that.
Okay.
Because I haven't wrote that down.
Okay, I have to cast my mind back. So I won't go into ultra detail, but when we were a really small team, we basically raised Antton actually did this, a few £1,000 kind of scrabbled together from government grants from Innovate UK, who I will always remain grateful for because they paid our salary in the early days.
Amazing.
Our salary was £1,000 a month, and they allowed us to do that for 18. We did that for about 18 months with Innovate UK. Wow. We used that and a kind of a micro team, myself and Antton, an intern, to kind of build the first version of a kind of semi-functional product, something that we could take to investors, and we managed to convince a small number of kind of angel high net worth investors and some tiny funds to put a small amount of cash into the business. So that was kind of our, I guess you could call it our pre-seed. Then we went into the next phase of the business where we had a bit of cash, we could hire our first employees, and we got to kind of our first customers using the product. Then we raised our seed round on the back of being able to go to investors and say, hey, we told you we'd find customers, and we found some customers. And then we went into our kind of growth phase in the drone industry. And then we kind of raised a little bit of additional money from our existing investors. So it wasn't quite a round, but it's very, very helpful to have investors who they truly believe in the mission and they back you as founders. Often you'll go back to them and say, we just need another 6 months, and there's a discussion to be had. But those kind of bridge rounds have saved many, many businesses. Some of the best businesses you've ever heard of have been saved by existing investors saying, yeah, we'll back you until you're ready to do your next major fundraise. So we've done a couple of those. Then we raised our Series A. And our Series A was a really interesting pivot for the business because it was right in the middle of our pivot from drones to motor. It was an incredibly tricky fundraise to do because we were going out to investors and we were saying, the story was, look at this amazing business that we've built in drone. Now imagine what it might look like if we did it in an industry 1,000 times as large. And that's an incredibly difficult pitch. So investors were the less risk, kind of pro-risk investors, the more risk-averse investors would say to us, well, go and prove that you can do it in the world of motor, then we'll invest. And actually, a couple of investors said, no, this is really, really interesting. We can see what this might look like. And whilst we were fundraising, we made a call as a leadership team, which I think, looking back, was a good call, which was during the fundraise, we basically went to the team and we said, drop everything. The number one most important thing for this team to achieve is to land 3 motor customers. Because if we can get that going and get 3 motor customers in whilst we're fundraising, that's a hell of a story in comparison to imagine what this could look like. And we managed to do it, right, with that kind of maniacal level of focus. And I'll always be grateful for the team that managed to get that off the ground. That was a real phenomenal kind of execution exercise from that team.
Love it.
And so by the time we actually raised that Series A, from Chamath Palihapitiya and Social Capital over in the US, they had kind of backed us, they backed the idea, and they saw us bring in those early motor customers. And they said, yeah, we're going to lead the A. And then 2021, we made the difficult decision at the time, but looking back, a very easy decision, to close the drone business entirely, which we've been working on for 4 or 5 years, and focus all of our attention on commercial motor. Again, another one of those decisions that I look back on and do not regret, right? It was a ballsy decision at the time, and it allowed us to be maniacally focused on commercial motor. We did that, and then we raised the Series B in 2023, and that was with Octopus Ventures. That was the large round, which I think this talk is kind of named after.
Yes, 38 million. Oh, it's not bad, is it? It's not bad. Someone's doing all right. Love to see it. In terms of that then, it feels really weird to ask about what you did wrong after you've just said all the good things that you've done, but I'm keen to tease out the learnings, and if we can help other people do things slightly differently. So you've clearly been very successful. You've raised over 60 million, business is going well, but when you look back, is there anything that you did wrong? Is there anything that you would approach the different stages slightly differently? Have you got any tips for people that are interested in raising?
Specifically on fundraising, what we did wrong, basically everything. And I think when I tell the story about the different raises, obviously now in retrospect it sounds like this kind of success story that was exponential, but this is a long time, right? We're looking back 9 years, and I have made every single mistake in the book, which I'm very open about. Again, I love talking about the mistakes. So I'll talk through a couple of them. So the first mistake I made way back at the beginning was not building a little advisory board around me of mentors who could actually help me fundraise. I don't know if it was because I had this kind of hero mentality of, no, I'll just do it myself and figure it out, or if it's because I was just kind of too thick to realize that I needed advice. There's probably some combination of the two. But I just went out and tried to raise a round of financing by myself. I literally had never heard of a VC. I only knew what a VC was because someone happened to mention it to me, right? And instead of going out and being really intentional, saying, right, who's going to help me figure this out? I'm going to find 2 or 3 people who have been there and done it, and I'm going to ask them and grill them for advice, and I'm going to, every time I have an idea, I'm going to bounce it off of them. I didn't do that. I just went and did it myself. And it took months when it maybe could have taken weeks, right? Yeah. So again, just being active and intentional about going out and building yourself a mini kind of mentorship group is incredibly powerful. And I've kind of brought that learning with me now. Almost everything I do now, I will, well, not every decision, but every big challenge I will try and have 2 or 3 people around me who've kind of been there and been through it. And they don't need to be paid. They don't need to be kind of the best professional in the industry. It just really needs to be someone that you trust and who you get on with and that you can have open conversations with. So I think that was a big learning. And another one was, and again, this is one that we apply much more kind of thoughtfully now in fundraising, is going into fundraisers unprepared with the mentality that preparation will kind of happen in real time, ad hoc, whilst you're fundraising. So, we'd go and meet an investor, they'd ask us a bunch of questions about the business. It might be the first time we'd had some of those questions come up. And my response would be like, whoa, that's a really good question. I'll go away and have a think about it. Yeah. And then I'd go away and think about the question and write down an answer to it. An incredibly inefficient way to get anything you need ever in life, right? Yeah. So I think now, our mentality is very different now. When we go into certainly a formal fundraise, we will be quite meticulous in our preparation. We'll think through in advance the 50 questions which are most likely to be asked. Yeah. We'll document really good answers with input from the team. We'll make it into a very nice, thoughtfully put together document. We'll speak to investors. We'll gather all of the questions that we get asked. We'll add them to that document. We call it an investment memo, but really all it is a massive FAQ. And it takes time. Like the last in our Series B fundraise, this investment memo was 88 pages long. So this is a serious piece of work. It took about 3 weeks to build. But two things happen when you do this. The first is that you learn an enormous amount about your own business. I know this sounds really counterintuitive, but nothing teaches you about your own business, your own customers, your own unit economics, your own financial projections, like turning it into a really well-written document and questioning your own team who are really on the ground and know the details and having them give you answers. So you learn about your own business and you become much more confident pitching your own business. And sometimes you even realize some of the mistakes that you're making and say, wow, putting together this document, I've realized that we really shouldn't be servicing this type of customer at all because we're not making any money. Right, so that's the first thing, you learn about your own business. And the second thing is you come across as someone who's much more prepared and professional and legit in the course of a fundraise. Yeah. And that has some interesting knock-on effects because often you'll speak to an investor or someone who works at a VC. And you just see them as an investor who you need to impress. But the reality is that they often then will have to turn around to their own fund and they'll have to pitch your business to their business. And they'll have to get maybe 6 or 7, or in some cases I've seen kind of up to 15 other investors in their business excited about your business and wanting to invest in your business. And so what they'll do is they'll spend a bunch of time with you as a founder. They'll try and learn your business as well as possible by asking you a bunch of questions, and they'll be writing their own investment memo. They'll then turn around and go back to their fund, and they'll pitch their investment memo at the investment committee, the IC. If you've written their investment memo essentially for them, they won't necessarily all admit this, but you've written a great document for them, you've made their life a hell of a lot easier. And if they're speaking to 20 companies and are trying to invest in a certain number of those companies, are they going to invest in the 19 companies that require them to go and write their own 20, 30, 50-page memo? Or are they going to really push the company that's already done all the hard work for them? I think it's the latter. So, we started doing this kind of just on the back of the seed round. We did it in the Series A and the Series B. It's probably been one of the most impactful decisions I've made as CEO, is this kind of very rigorous preparation upfront and the production of this document for every fundraise since.
Amazing. Absolutely love it. That's gold. That's what we want, man. That's what we want. So you've got a lot of experience, I guess, in terms of how VCs are making investment decisions. Is there anything that surprised you about how they approach making decisions, or is every VC different? Like, as you've called out, some are more risk averse, some are happy to take risks. Is there anything about how they make decisions that surprised you?
There have been some surprises. So I think the surprising thing is that sometimes decision making is opaque, and I think this is one of the most common gripes I hear from founders is the opacity of some investor decisions. I'm no longer surprised by that because I understand that it's just business. And once you realize that these VCs are speaking to 10, 20, 50 companies at a time, they're super busy and they've got a hell of a lot of work to do and they're working late, suddenly it becomes apparent why they're not sitting down with you as a founder and patting you on your head and spending 25 minutes telling you exactly why they're not choosing to invest in your business, right? So it makes sense in retrospect. But I think at the time, when you spend 4, 5, 7 hours with an investor, you feel like you've really got to know them, and then you get a 3-line email that says something along the lines of, it's been great getting to know you. Sadly, on this occasion, we will have to pass. We couldn't get comfortable with the market size. It feels like a kick in the guts. So I think I was surprised by that initially, but now it actually makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
The converse to that, I had a hilarious situation with one of our fundraisers. I won't talk about individual investor or fundraise, but a hilarious situation where we spent several months in really intensive due diligence with an investor. Poring over financial models, and they were going to invest this certain amount of cash, and we figured out exactly what we were going to do with all of that cash, and they were very, very detail oriented. And eventually they said, they dropped me a WhatsApp and they were like, Ed, just so you know, we're going to go ahead, we're going to make the investment, and it's going to be this many £1 million, and you're going to get the term sheet this afternoon. And I was having a conversation with Antton, I was like, wouldn't it be amazing if they gave us an extra $1 million? Think what we could do with it, because we've got this really well thought out plan that for the amount that they're investing. But if we had an extra $1 million, we could be a bit more ballsy. We could take this bet that we've always wanted to take. We could hire that person. So I just dropped the investor a WhatsApp and said, any chance that you increase your investment amount by $1 million? And he just texts back, get the 2 blue ticks, and it's like, this person is typing. He's like, done. And so after several months of really intensive due diligence and poring over a financial model to choose this exact amount that was going to be invested, it took a single WhatsApp to massively increase at the time the amount that was invested. And if I hadn't sent the WhatsApp, it wouldn't have happened, right? And so another kind of life philosophy of mine is don't ask, don't get, which I think many, many founders kind of resonate with so strongly, because your life is just asking for favors and making kind of unreasonable demands. But you would never necessarily expect that after such an intensive period of due diligence, one WhatsApp could change the course of the company.
Change the course, man. Absolutely love it. That's what it's all about, man. I've got to ask this one, and I briefly mentioned it to you beforehand, but I used ChatGPT to help prepare the questions. Why wouldn't you? Got a few quid. I pay for the top tier, so I used deep research, and it came back and it said Ed Leon Klinger transcribes investor meetings to what's the deal there, man? You just talk us through it. Is that true?
I transcribe basically everything, and now this is very, very common. On a video call, there are so many of these AI tools that you just add and it transcribes everything. I think I asked you earlier, I just don't know where that's from on the internet. How did it make its way to the internet that I'm doing this? I don't know. I'm very open about it, so when I speak to someone, they'll know that I'm transcribing the meeting. But we find this incredibly valuable at Flock, kind of transcribing and recording as much as possible, and then making sense of that data afterwards. So, there have been times when I've played back an investor meeting in my head and thought, that was a strange question. Why was it that they asked that question? You can just go back and listen to it again and realize you actually maybe misinterpreted the question entirely. An astounding amount of conversation. When you look back on it, you actually realize you missed something or you misinterpreted something because in the kind of heat or speed of the moment. I love the fact that these transcription tools now are kind of queryable data. So you can say, how positive were these investors about international expansion, and you can immediately kind of get interesting insights. We're doing something similar at Flock. We're taking this kind of to the next level. We're doing kind of transcript analysis on some of our customer calls, and we spend a lot of time with our fleet customers, and they tell us a lot of information about how they're managing their fleet, and we can use that to kind of do a longitudinal analysis of them over the course of an insured year. And then we can learn an immense amount about them. 12 hours of conversation, that's thousands or tens of thousands of words. And then we can actually do kind of quantified analysis on that, and we can turn that into insights that we can use to help us price them. Wow, so if their competence around certain topics is quantifiably improving throughout the course of the year, we can feel more comfortable giving them lower prices at their renewal because of how much they've learned and how far they've come. From a risk management perspective. So, I think that quote is from kind of back in kind of end of COVID, when the very first transcription tools like Firefly's AI were coming out. But now they're much more prolific. We're starting to use them everywhere and actually embed them into the product itself.
Amazing. Actually, I think it was think it was like Ray Dalio's book. He in his company, they video record every meeting, and anyone can access and watch any meeting that anyone in the whole company's had, whether it's the board, whether it's whoever. And I was like, that is proper, like, open, like,
radical transparency.
Radical transparency. So I found that really interesting. And complete aside, I was looking at a company called Rewind, and it's a product that records every screen that you have always. And if you think, oh, who did I talk to about that? And if it was on your screen, you can search it and find it. I was like, that's mad. So.
How does the search bit work then?
I have no idea, to be honest. Yeah, I'm just up here talking shit. Yeah. No, I don't know how it works. There's AI. So, but yeah, imagine that. So, right, I'm going to keep the next bit to 10 minutes, mate. We're going to be whistle stop, and then we'll see how we go. Maybe take a few questions. So, like, just the couple of last little bits I'd love to cover is, I guess, a little bit around building the team and like your style, leadership style a bit, and then we'll take a few predictions for the future. I guess the first thing perhaps to speak to is like making the first few hires, you know, getting that core team in. What did that look like, and how did that change to, you know, where you are now? Obviously, I guess now you've got to have more processes and a bit of structure and all that type of stuff. So what did that look like?
It started very, very scrappy, as you can imagine. So kind of very smart people who we met. We just kind of say, hey, we're working on this really crazy, exciting company. Do you want to work with us? And sometimes they'd say, you're smoking something. Of course, I'm not going to come and work for you. And sometimes they say, this is exactly what I'm looking for. More often than not, what would happen is we'd actually just bring them in, spend a few hours with them, give some interesting tasks to work on. They'd join us part-time. One of them said, I can't join you, but I can invest, and he became an angel investor. And then as the company grew, he actually said, actually, I do want to come and work for you. So it was kind of very scrappy and ad hoc to start with. And you know, back then, what were we looking for? I think what we were looking for were kind of incredibly bold, risk-taking people who would work crazy hours and take crazy risks and do whatever it took to cobble together a half-baked product and then have the guts to put it in front of a customer and get laughed at, right? That's basically what we were looking for in the early days, because like I said, none of us really had job descriptions. Everyone's piling in, and we needed people. You know, you can't hire your third employee. Can't be someone who says the words, oh, that's not really my job to fix that. It's like when you're the third employee or the fifth employee of a company, your job is just whatever needs to happen. And that applies to the CEO. Whatever needs to happen in the company, you just need to jump in and get it done, or it's not going to get done. So it's kind of an obsessive entrepreneurial mentality of, I will make this thing work if it kills me. As the business is, I kind of miss those days, actually. I found that really, really fun. I love being able to sit around a single table and kind of have a debate about the future of the business, and every single person who needs to know is there. Things have changed, obviously, dramatically now. So now we have a much more structured process. I still interview every single person who gets a job at Flock, and I want to maintain that until it becomes physically impossible, because I think there is nothing more important than getting hiring right, and the cost of a bad hire is so much more than the salary you pay them. It's a cultural knock-on effect that creates a malaise across other people in the company and turns off some of your best employees. So the cost of a bad hire is really, really high. Now, you know, one of the biggest changes is that now the complexity and scale of the challenges that we have as a business now are much, much higher than they were. Because now if we change our product, we might be impacting tens of thousands of users. You know, some of our customers are multi-million-pound customers. We're partnering with really, really large insurers. We've just partnered with the largest insurer in the UK. So, you know, we need to bring in a new caliber of individual for some roles, not all roles. And that's been a challenge, definitely. You know, our leadership team is formed of people who have worked at some of the biggest insurance companies on the planet. And like I said, it helps to have a mission that draws these people in. But, you know, these people are still people. They come with their own challenges, management challenges, culture challenges. But it's been, that's been a steep learning curve for me, is realizing that we need to bring in the chops.
Bit of industry chops, but you've still managed to blend it together with the underlying mission, they've bought into what you're all about. So you've held on to that culture.
Yeah, and you can test for this. And I think, again, this is if I can look back on some of my mistakes, I think I had this. I think there was a period of the business where we didn't proactively test at the interview stage and be kind of rigorous and scientific about testing for the ability to be reactive and move fast and be dynamic. Because that's a skill set that's needed across the entire business.
Yep.
Right? So even the most senior people that we bring in who have been at some of these very, very large companies, we still need them to be able to think on their feet and make decisions really, really quickly and inspire change in others.
Yep.
Otherwise, we end up becoming an accidental big corporate that moves slowly. You know, you are who you hire. And so if we hire a bunch of slow-moving corporates, we become a slow-moving corporate. So the realization was actually you can test for this. Interview, you can ask sensibly thought-out questions, like, you know, an obvious one is, tell me a time in your most recent role that you have enacted a dramatic change in a crazily small amount of time. And that really separates people quite quickly, because some people will say, oh yeah, you know, we rolled out this new system and we managed to do it in 18 months. It was amazing. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, that's terrible. And others will say, you know, I work at a very, very large insurance company, and we had to react to COVID. In the space of 3 days, we had to take 15,000 employees out of the office and put them into, you know, working from home. And I was personally in Currys, and this is not me, but this is what people are saying, in Currys buying 1,000 laptops. And I was there, and they kept the store open till midnight, and I brought 30 people along with me, and we were handing them out. That's the kind of mentality, I think. You don't belong in a big corporate. You belong in a company like Flock. So you can see, you can kind of spot those gems, but it has to be proven through anecdotes. And you know, I think the wrong type of question at interview, and there's kind of a mistake that many founders fall foul of, myself included back in the day. The wrong type of question is, are you the kind of person who is dynamic and fast moving? Because everyone's going to tell you that they are. And things suddenly crumble when you say, give me 3 examples of that so that I can be very confident. And you know, the question, you have to just keep digging, because people will say, you know, we is the killer in an interview. We made this big change. It's like, when you say we, what do you mean? And you realize it was them and a team of 26 people reporting into them. You're really interested in what they did themselves. And so that's how we've managed to find now that blend of kind of really good corporate experience and fast-moving, dynamic people who get stuff done.
Mate, love that. Absolutely love it. 2 questions to wrap us up, and then we'll go get a little gin and tonic, and we'll put a little card behind the bar, and hopefully everyone can stay have a glass of wine or something like that. I've got 2 final questions for you, Ed. My first one, and I'm just going to come straight out with it. I'm not even like, what is your most unsexy but essential founder habit? If you're talking, someone's out there starting, it's not sexy, but what should all founders be doing? Transcribing everything.
That's one of them.
That's one of them. Lucky pants. I don't know.
I won't choose one. I might choose a few.
Come on, give us a couple.
So early days, spent an this is deeply unsexy. Spent an unfathomable amount of time on LinkedIn just finding the right people. And it's a really boring task. And actually a lot of founder tasks are just thankless, boring exercises like this. But if you're looking for someone to hire, or if you're looking for the right person to meet inside an organization, figuring out how to do kind of well-written, well-structured searches on LinkedIn was one of the things I spent an enormous amount of time on. I think that's changed now. I spend an unfathomable amount of time using every AI-powered tool I can get my hands on to achieve essentially the same result. I guess the kind of generic summary is master whatever the tool is at the time that you need to find the right person. And then I think the knock-on from that, this is where things get a little bit sexier, if you can call it that, is be incredibly ballsy and reach out to people directly and ask them for favors. You know, I said earlier, don't ask, don't get. It's amazing what people will do, but you can just, you know, there was a moment where we had a really complicated product problem. It was too complicated for me to solve. No one in the business knew how to solve this problem of kind of scaling our product from tens of users to thousands of users. And I spent a bunch of time trying to figure out who the single best person in the country is in the world of product. And I found the person who I thought it was. His name's, I'm happy to talk about who it is. It's a guy called Mike Hudak. Mike was really early at Facebook. He would make a bunch of the big decisions with Mark Zuckerberg about product. He went on to become the Chief Product and Technology Officer at Deliveroo and scaled that from to an unfathomable number of users. Then he became the Chief Product Officer at Monzo, right? So I was like, you can't really find a better product person probably anywhere in the country, if not the continent, than this guy. And I was kind of sat on his LinkedIn, and I added him, and he'd accepted. And I was thinking, I was like, I really need to ask this guy how we're going to scale the product. So I kind of like clicked in the message box, and I was like, Mike, can you help me scale our product from tens of users to hundreds of users, thousands of users? I really need your help. And he read it, and he just immediately replied back, being like, yep, I can help. Let's jump on a call. He had no context. He didn't know me, didn't know the business, but he just saw someone who was kind of curious and had a really specific problem and was, had the guts to ask it. So, the unsexy work of really thinking deeply about who the right person is actually turns into something quite exciting because now you're speaking to the right person. Yep. So that would be my next piece of advice is just put yourself out there and go for it and ask the question. Yep. And when you're looking for these kinds of people, ask specific questions. I think the least helpful thing you can do is send messages like, hey, I'm a big admirer of what you've worked on. Fancy grabbing a quick coffee. Most people will get hundreds of those messages. But if you say, hey, I'm a big admirer of what you've worked on, we're trying to rebuild our platform in React, and one of my engineers just quit, and I'm going to try and vibe code it myself in an hour. What's the best way to do it? Yeah. Right, that's the kind of question that someone gets, and they're like, oh, even if they hate the question, they're definitely going to have an opinion on it. So, if you can ask someone really I've always found that if you can ask someone really specific questions that they'll have an opinion on, almost always they'll get back to you with an answer, or they'll say, let's jump on a call. And I get so many of these messages now, and these really, really specific questions. I could be the busiest I've ever been, unbelievably stressed on my way to a big meeting, and I'll get a LinkedIn that's like, hey Ed, I'm trying to launch an AI insurance product. Should I speak to this insurance provider? And I'll reply back being like, literally on my way to him, like, no, of course you shouldn't go meet that specific provider, because it's really interesting to kind of answer those kinds of questions if you're in that world. So that would be my next, that's slightly sexier advice, I guess.
And I think all of us need to be like Mike. Like, good on Mike. Hey,
yeah, such a legend.
Yeah, it sounds like
so
an
happy to
absolute
plug
legend.
Mike Hudak. Yeah.
Good man, good man. Last question, drawing it to a close. We're fast forwarding in. Is that fast forwarding in? That's not a word, is it? We're fast forwarding. 5 years from now, we're lucky enough to get you to come back. What does life look like for Ed and for Flock?
What does life look like? Well, I just got married, so I hope that I'm still married.
So that would be a good start. That would be a good start.
I expect that will be the case. My wife will watch the video, so I have to say this.
With the same person.
With exactly the same person. Yes. Also, my wife is actually, this is a story for afterwards, but my wife is also my VC investor. So I fell in love with one of my investors and we got married. So that was an interesting and complicated and ultimately great outcome. So that would be nice. From a company perspective, I think it's so unbelievably difficult to answer this question now. And the reason it's so difficult is because the world is changing at a crazy speed. Faster, I look back on the 9 years of the business, the world has changed throughout, technology has changed throughout, but it's been relatively predictable. Now we're in this unbelievable moment where you almost can't predict what the next few months are going to look like because of the rate of change of AI. With that said, in 5 years' time, I think our mission as a business will stay the same. It's endured for the entire history of the business. I would love for it to endure for the next 10 years, which is to make the world quantifiably safer. I really hope that we've been able to now, in 2025, prove that we can do this. We've got a lot of evidence that we can make fleets safer and reduce incidents. I would love to continue on that trend and for that trend to actually accelerate. And I would love to be able to say in 5 years' time how many lives we've saved because of the technology that we've deployed. That would be a nice place to be. I used to think about things, when someone used to ask me what the future of the business looked like, I used to think about how many people we'd hire. And that was the thing that was exciting for me. What's weird now is that I'm actually more excited about not hiring lots of people. I'm more excited about building a great business with a relatively stable headcount where each individual can be 5 times, 10 times, 1,000 times more productive year on year. because of the technology that we build and the technology that we use. And AI is absolutely supercharging that. So wherever we are in 5 years, I hope that we have kind of really embodied the kind of spirit and mentality that just says we're not afraid of new tools. We're not going to freak out and and kind of tell ourselves that we have to kind of put our head in the sand and not use them. I hope we're the kind of business that is rapidly onboarding and building those kinds of tools so that people can automate away a lot of the grunt work and focus on work that's really fun and really creative and put their kind of human biological brains to work, solving complicated creative problems that make customers' lives amazing, rather than what a lot of people do today, which is work that can and should be automated by AI.
Yep. Mate, I feel like that's a good prediction. I feel like we're going to have to get you back now to just Sunny. Check that. We're going to finish with a round of applause for Ed. So good, man. Thank you, mate. Thank you. Man, I enjoyed that.